Hey everyone, welcome back to Whispers from the Dark. So today's video is going to be dark. With New Year's coming up, I thought we'd switch things up and narrate some New Year's Eve horror stories. These are the stories that turn celebrations into nightmares and make you wonder how safe that night really is. If you guys enjoy this kind of horror content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if you want more stories like these. Alright, let's get into some creepy New Year's Eve horror stories. I took the security job at the Carthage Hotel because I needed the money and because nobody else wanted to work New Year's Eve. The hotel sat on the edge of downtown, a 7-story brick building that had seen better days sometime around 1950. The lobby still had the original marble floors and Art Deco fixtures, but everything was coated in that particular kind of grime that comes from decades of deferred maintenance and declining revenue. The ballroom was on the second floor, and that's where they were throwing the party, some local business association's annual celebration. 200 people drinking cheap champagne and pretending the new year would be different from the last. I started my shift at 8. My supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Carol, walked me through the basics. Monitor the entrance, check IDs, make sure nobody gets too drunk or causes problems, keep an eye on the emergency exits. Simple enough. She showed me the security office, a converted coat closet with 4 grainy monitors showing feeds from cameras positioned around the ballroom and hallways. The equipment was old, the kind that still recorded to VHS tapes. Carol told me the owner was too cheap to upgrade. She left at 9, and I was alone. The party started picking up around 10. I did a walkthrough of the ballroom, just to show my face and let people know security was present. The room was beautiful in a faded way. High ceilings with ornate plasterwork, massive chandeliers that probably hadn't been cleaned in years, tall windows draped in heavy burgundy curtains. A small band played jazz standards on a stage at the far end. People clustered around cocktail tables, talking too loud over the music. I noticed the clock immediately. It hung above the stage, a large circular face with Roman numerals and brass hands, the kind you'd see in an old train station. It read 10:14, which matched my watch. I went back to the security office and settled in to watch the monitors. The feeds were poor quality, everything slightly out of focus, but I could see the ballroom well enough. People danced. People drank. The band played. Normal New Year's Eve stuff. I checked my phone periodically, scrolling through social media, watching friends from high school post pictures from parties I wasn't invited to. Around 11:30, I did another walkthrough. The energy in the room had shifted. People were getting louder, drunker, more animated. Someone had turned on the TV behind the bar, showing the Times Square countdown coverage, though it was muted. The clock above the stage read 11:32. My phone said the same. Back in the security office, I poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the pot Carol had left and watched the monitors. At 11:47, I noticed something odd. On the feed showing the stage area, the clock's hands seemed to freeze. I watched for a full 30 seconds. The minute hand didn't move. I glanced at my phone, 11:48. I looked back at the monitor. The clock still showed 11:47. I thought maybe it was the camera angle or the poor resolution, but something about it bothered me. I stood up to head back to the ballroom when my phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Happy almost New Year. Don't let the drunk people fight." I smiled and pocketed the phone. It was 11:52. When I entered the ballroom, I looked immediately at the clock. It still read 11:47. The second hand wasn't moving. I walked closer, weaving through dancers and drunk businessmen, until I stood directly below it. The clock was definitely stopped, but I could hear it ticking, a steady, mechanical rhythm that seemed too loud for the size of the mechanism. I pulled out my phone to check the time, 11:54. Someone bumped into me, apologizing through a champagne-glazed smile. I looked around. Nobody else seemed to notice. The band played. People laughed. The TV behind the bar showed the Times Square ball beginning its descent. At 11:58, a woman near the bar pointed at the clock and said something to her husband. He looked up, shrugged, checked his watch. Within a minute, a dozen people were staring at it, pointing, conferring with each other. Someone made a joke about getting stuck in the old year forever. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. The band kept playing, either oblivious or professional enough to ignore the distraction. I walked over to the bar and asked the bartender if there was a maintenance person on duty. He shook his head and poured 3 glasses of champagne simultaneously. The countdown started. Everyone turned toward the TV, shouting numbers in unison. 10, 9, 8. I watched the clock above the stage. It still read 11:47. The second hand still ticked, loud and insistent, but the hands didn't move. 7, 6, 5. The room felt suddenly too warm, too crowded, too loud. 4, 3, 2. I wanted to leave. 1. Happy New Year. Confetti cannons exploded. Champagne corks popped. Couples kissed. The band launched into Auld Lang Syne, and the clock above the stage moved. Not to 12 o'clock, straight to 12:01. The minute hand jumped forward 14 minutes in an instant, and everyone was too busy celebrating to notice. That's when I saw her. She stood in the corner farthest from the stage, near the burgundy curtains, perfectly still while everyone around her moved and cheered. She wore a silver dress, the kind with a full skirt and fitted bodice that looked like it belonged in a 1950s magazine. Her hair was styled in tight curls pinned close to her head. Her skin was pale, not just pale, but colorless, like old paper. And she was staring directly at me, not looking around the room, not watching the celebration, just staring, with an expression I can only describe as hollow. Empty, like someone had scooped out everything behind her eyes and left only the shell. I blinked, and in that fraction of a second, she raised a champagne glass to her lips. That's when I saw her mouth. It was sewn shut, black thread, thick and crude, crisscrossed over her lips in tight, deliberate stitches. She tilted the glass as if to drink, and champagne spilled down her chin, down the front of her silver dress, pooling at her feet. I opened my mouth to shout, to point, to do something, but when I blinked again, she was gone. Just gone. The corner was empty except for a slightly rumpled curtain and a champagne glass sitting on the floor. I pushed through the crowd, my heart hammering, trying to reach the spot where she'd been standing. People congratulated me on the new year, tried to hand me drinks, slapped my back. I ignored them. When I got to the corner, there was nothing. No woman. No champagne on the floor. Just the burgundy curtain and the smell of old dust and cigarette smoke that had soaked into the fabric over decades. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking. It was 12:03 a.m., January 1st. But my phone had been at 11:58 just minutes before. We'd lost time. 5 minutes, just gone. I spent the next hour walking the ballroom, watching the guests, looking for the woman in the silver dress. Nobody matched her description. Nobody seemed to notice anything unusual. But people kept complaining about their watches. My phone says one thing, my watch says another. Did we change time zones? I could have sworn it was earlier. Small comments, easy to dismiss, but they accumulated. At one point, I asked a man in an expensive suit if he'd seen a woman in a silver dress. He laughed and said, "Friend, everyone's wearing silver tonight." He wasn't wrong. Sparkles and sequins everywhere. But I knew what I'd seen. At 2 a.m., the party finally wound down. I helped the stragglers find their coats, called cabs for people too drunk to drive, locked doors behind the last guests. The ballroom looked like a disaster. Confetti and champagne glasses and abandoned party hats scattered across every surface. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive until morning. I went back to the security office to complete my shift report and collect the VHS tapes. Standard protocol. Carol had told me to bag the tapes and leave them in the office safe for the manager to review if there were any incidents. I rewound the tape covering the main ballroom camera and watched the last hour of footage. Everything looked normal until 11:47. At exactly that moment, the feed flickered. Just a brief stutter, like someone had bumped the camera. Then the footage continued normally. I watched myself enter the frame at 11:54, standing below the clock. I watched the countdown. I watched midnight arrive. And I watched the clock jump from 11:47 to 12:01. But here's what made my blood turn cold. On the tape, between 11:59 and 12 o'clock, there was nothing. 1 second, people were counting down. The next second, they were celebrating. No transition. No moment of change. Just a hard cut, like someone had edited out exactly 1 minute of footage. I rewound again, playing it in slow motion. As the timestamp approached 12 o'clock, the image began to distort. Vertical lines of static crawled across the screen. The audio, which had been picking up the countdown and music, became a harsh, grinding noise. Then, pure static. White noise filling the screen completely. The static lasted for what the VHS timestamp said was 1 minute, but but I sat there watching it for at least 3. Time felt wrong, stretched thin like taffy. When the image returned, the timestamp jumped from 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds to 12 hours and 1 minute. 1 minute, missing entirely. I fast-forwarded through the static, frame by frame. Most of it was pure noise. But embedded in the white chaos, barely visible, I found it. A single frame, clear for just a fraction of a second before dissolving back into static. The ballroom, completely empty. No guests, no band, no decorations. Just the empty room, chandeliers dark, and in the center of the floor, the woman in the silver dress. She stood perfectly still, facing the camera. And around her, barely visible like shadows or fog, dozens of other figures. Men in dark suits, women in evening gowns, all dressed in styles from decades past, all frozen, as if caught mid-movement in some eternal celebration they could never complete. And every single one of them was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. I ejected the tape immediately, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I wanted to leave, to walk out and never come back, but I had 3 more hours on my shift. I couldn't focus on the monitors. I kept thinking about that woman, about her sewn mouth, about the champagne spilling down her dress, about all those figures frozen in the static, trapped in a moment they couldn't escape. At 5 a.m., Carol came back to relieve me. She looked exhausted, like she'd been up all night. I must have looked worse, because the first thing she said was, "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to laugh it off, told her the party had been uneventful, just some drunk guests and too much confetti. She nodded, but she was watching me closely. As I was packing up to leave, she said, "Did you notice anything strange about the clock?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "The big one above the stage. It stopped last year too. Right at 11:47. Every New Year's Eve, same thing. I don't know why. Manager won't fix it, won't replace it. Says it's part of the building's history." She paused, sorting through paperwork. "This hotel has a lot of history. Not all of it good." I asked her what she meant. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. In 1952, they had a big New Year's celebration in that ballroom. Over 300 people. Fire broke out at 11:59 p.m. Electrical issue, they said. Old wiring, faulty chandelier. The exits were blocked. Too many people trying to leave at once. 63 people died. Most of them trapped in that ballroom, suffocating on smoke, burning alive. They never made it to midnight. Never got to celebrate the new year. My mouth went dry. That's horrible. The hotel tried to cover it up, of course. Didn't want the publicity. They renovated, changed management, pretended it never happened. But staff have always reported strange things. Especially on New Year's Eve. Cold spots. Voices. Clock stopping. Last year, a guest claimed she saw a woman in an old-fashioned dress standing in the corner. When she tried to talk to her, the woman disappeared. Carol looked at me directly. "Did you see anything like that?" I wanted to tell her. About the woman with the sewn mouth. About the missing minute. About the figures frozen in the static. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Carol was watching me, like she already knew. Or maybe it was the fear that saying it out loud would make it more real. So I shook my head and lied. "No, nothing like that." She didn't believe me. I could tell. But she just nodded and turned back to her paperwork. Probably for the best. The less you know about this place, the better you'll sleep. I left the hotel at dawn, walking out into cold January air, and I didn't look back. I called Carol later that morning and quit. Told her I'd found another job, better pay, closer to home. She didn't argue, just said she understood and wished me luck. I never went back to the Carthage Hotel. Never drove past it. Never even looked it up online. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that missing minute. About all those people trapped at 11:59, counting down to a midnight they'll never reach. About the woman in the silver dress, trying to drink champagne through a sewn mouth, trying to celebrate a moment that was stolen from her 70 years ago. And I wonder if they know they're stuck, or if they think it's still New Year's Eve 1952, and midnight is just seconds away. I wonder if time feels different when you're caught in it like that. If 1 minute can stretch into forever, if forever can collapse into a single, frozen frame. I don't celebrate New Year's Eve anymore. When midnight comes, I make sure I'm nowhere near a clock. I need to tell you about New Year's Eve, 2019. About Miller's Ridge and what happened to me and my roommate Danny up there. I still can't explain it. The doctors say what I experienced was trauma, maybe hypothermia playing tricks on my mind, but I know what I saw. I know what we heard. And I know that whatever was happening in those woods that night had nothing to do with cold or fear or my imagination. Danny had been bugging me about this party for weeks. He'd heard about it from some girl he met at a bar in town. Said it was legendary, this annual thing up at Miller's Ridge where people from 3 counties would gather around a massive bonfire. Live music, local moonshine, the whole Appalachian experience. I wasn't exactly thrilled about driving an hour into the mountains on the coldest night of the year, but Danny had that way about him. He could talk you into anything. Plus, I figured it beat sitting in our cramped apartment watching the ball drop on a TV with bad reception. We left campus around 8:30. The roads got narrower and darker as we climbed into the hills, our headlights cutting through fog that seemed to rise up from the ground itself. Danny had directions written on a torn piece of notebook paper. Turn at the old Sinclair station, follow Route 12 for 6 miles, watch for the signs. The signs started appearing around mile 4. Crude wooden boards nailed to trees, arrows painted in what looked like White House paint, pointing deeper into the forest. Miller's Ridge. Party this way. Some of them had smiley faces drawn next to the words. We parked in a clearing where maybe a dozen other cars sat at odd angles, their windows already fogged over. It was just past 10 when we started walking. The path was obvious enough. Trampled snow and mud, the distant glow of firelight through the trees, the muffled sound of music drifting toward us. My breath came out in thick clouds. The cold was the kind that makes your lungs ache, the kind that seeps through your jacket no matter how many layers you're wearing. Danny was already excited, practically jogging ahead of me, saying he could smell the wood smoke. The party opened up in front of us like something out of a painting. There was a bonfire in the center of the clearing, maybe 12 feet high, sending sparks up into the black sky. Picnic tables arranged in a loose circle held kegs and bottles and paper plates. A small stage had been built against the tree line, and a bluegrass band was playing fiddle, banjo, guitar, upright bass. 40, maybe 50 people stood around in clusters, red cups in their hands, faces lit orange by the flames. Everyone turned to look at us when we walked in. Not all at once, but in this slow wave, like dominoes falling. And then they smiled. Every single one of them smiled at the exact same time. These wide, welcoming grins that should have felt friendly, but instead made something tighten in my chest. A man near the beer table waved us over, gestured for us to help ourselves. Danny grabbed 2 cups and started filling them. I stood there, taking it all in. That's when I noticed their breath. Or rather, the absence of it. It was maybe 15 degrees that night. My breath was hanging in front of my face like smoke. Danny's too. But when I looked around at the people surrounding us, these folks in flannel and denim and winter coats, I couldn't see their breath. Not a single cloud of condensation. They stood there laughing and talking, mouths moving, words coming out, but the air around them stayed perfectly clear. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe they'd all been there longer. Maybe their body heat had adjusted. Maybe the bonfire was warming the air more than I realized. Danny didn't seem to notice anything wrong. He was already talking to a couple of guys near the stage, nodding along to whatever story they were telling. The band launched into another song, Wagon Wheel, I think, though it might have been some local variation. People started clapping along, this steady rhythm that seemed too synchronized, too perfect. I accepted a cup from someone. Didn't drink it, just held it and tried to blend in. The people were friendly enough on the surface. They asked where we went to school, what we were studying, whether we'd been to Miller's Ridge before. But there was something hollow in the way they spoke, like they were reading from a script they'd memorized but didn't quite understand. Their eyes didn't match their smiles. When they laughed, it sounded like a recording of laughter, slightly delayed, slightly wrong. The woman next to me was maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She asked if I was having a good time. I said yes. She asked if the music was good. I said yes. She asked if I'd like to dance. I made an excuse about needing to check on Danny. When I glanced back a minute later, she was asking the same questions to someone else, in the exact same order, with the exact same inflection. Danny found me near the edge of the clearing around 11. His face had changed. The excitement was gone. He leaned close and spoke quietly, even though the music was loud enough to cover our conversation. He said he'd been talking to a guy who claimed to have graduated from our school 15 years ago, But when Danny mentioned the new student center that had been built just last year, the guy acted like he knew all about it, said he'd eaten there dozens of times. Danny had also noticed the breath thing. And something else. Nobody's phone was working. Not no signal. The phones wouldn't turn on at all. Batteries drained or something worse. We decided to leave. Just like that, without discussion, without saying goodbye to anyone. We set down our cups and started walking back the way we'd come, following our own footprints in the trampled snow. The music faded behind us. The firelight dimmed. And then we were in the forest, in the dark, with just the distant glow at our backs. Except we couldn't find the path. I don't mean we got turned around. I mean the path wasn't there. We walked for maybe 20 yards, and then the trees just closed in, thick and tangled. No clear route forward. We turned back, thinking we'd missed the trail, but when we tried a different direction, the same thing happened. Dense forest, no way through. And always, behind us, we could hear the party. The music never stopped. The same song, over and over, the fiddle hitting the same notes in the same sequence. Voices laughing. The crackle and pop of the bonfire. We tried for what felt like hours. I checked my watch, but the hands seemed stuck, or moving so slowly I couldn't tell if time was passing at all. Danny was getting panicked, his voice rising, saying we needed to go back to the party and ask for help. I didn't want to go back. Something in my gut was screaming at me that going back would be the worst thing we could do. But we were lost. Truly lost. The forest around us looked the same in every direction, and that sound, that music, that laughter, was always there, like a compass pointing to something we didn't want to find. Finally, we broke through the tree line and stumbled back into the clearing. Nothing had changed. The bonfire was still roaring. The band was still on stage. The same people were standing in the same positions, holding the same red cups. And they were playing that song. The exact same song we'd heard when we first arrived, maybe an hour ago. Same verse. Same chord progression. The fiddle player's bow moving in the exact same arc. Nobody seemed to notice we'd been gone. Or if they did, they didn't care. The woman with the gray hair smiled at me and asked if I was having a good time. I didn't answer. Danny grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt through my jacket. His eyes were wide and wet and terrified. People started gathering near the bonfire. Someone shouted that it was almost midnight. Someone else started counting down. 10, 9, 8. The voices joined together. This chorus of sound that was too unified, too rhythmic, like a chant more than a celebration. 7, 6, 5. I looked at Danny and he looked at me, and we both knew, without saying anything, without planning it, that we had to run. We bolted. Didn't care about the path this time. Didn't care about finding the right way. We just ran into the trees, branches whipping at our faces, snow soaking through our shoes. Behind us the countdown continued. 4, 3, 2, 1. And then cheering. This massive wall of sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the forest, chasing us. I don't know how we found the car. 1 second we were crashing through undergrowth. The next we were in the clearing where we'd parked. And there it was, Danny's beat-up Honda with the dent in the passenger door. He fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up again. His hands were shaking so badly, I thought he wouldn't be able to get the key in the ignition. But he did. The engine started. We peeled out of there, tires spinning in the snow, fishtailing onto the narrow road. I looked in the rearview mirror. Just once. The clearing where the party had been was visible through the trees, lit up by that huge bonfire. But there was nobody there. The stage was empty. The instruments sat abandoned, the banjo lying on its side, the fiddle resting on a chair. The picnic tables were bare. All those people, 40 or 50 of them, just gone. Like they'd never existed at all. We didn't talk on the drive back. What was there to say? When we got to campus, Danny went straight to his room and I went to mine. We never discussed that night. Not really. He transferred schools the next semester. Said he wanted to be closer to home. I did some research though. Couldn't help myself. Found out that Miller's Ridge had a history. Back in 1987, there was a New Year's Eve party in an old cabin up there. About 30 people celebrating, drinking, dancing. They had a faulty heater. Carbon monoxide built up slowly, quietly. By the time midnight came, most of them were already unconscious. All of them died before morning. The rescue team found them 3 days later, still in their party clothes, still holding their drinks. I don't know what we experienced that night. Maybe it was some kind of memorial, some reenactment by locals who wanted to honor the dead. Maybe we got turned around in the woods, and our fear made us see things that weren't there. Maybe we stumbled onto something that doesn't have an explanation, something that happens in those mountains every year when the calendar turns over. But I remember their breath, or the lack of it. I remember that song, playing over and over, never ending. And I remember the empty clearing in my rearview mirror, those abandoned instruments, that bonfire still burning with nobody around to feed it. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the countdown in my head. 10, 9, 8. And I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed until midnight. If we joined that chorus of voices, welcomed whatever new year they were celebrating. I wonder if we'd still be there, asking strangers if they're having a good time, waiting for a countdown that never quite reaches one. I found my father on New Year's Day, 2020. He was slumped over his desk in that little cabin he'd retired to up in the hills outside Ashland, Kentucky. His hand was still wrapped around his pen. The journal was open in front of him, ink bleeding where his palm had pressed into the wet letters. Heart attack, the coroner said. Quick, painless, probably. He'd been writing when it happened, mid-sentence, and that's how he went, reaching for one more word he'd never get to finish. I'm an only child. My mother passed when I was 16, so it was just me to deal with everything. The funeral, the cabin, all his things. I couldn't bring myself to sell the place right away. Couldn't even sort through most of his belongings. I just locked the door and went back to my apartment in Lexington, telling myself I'd handle it when I was ready. 3 years went by. I got better at not thinking about him every day. Better at not crying when I passed his favorite brand of coffee in the grocery store. The holidays were hard, but I managed. I spent New Year's Eve of 2021 and 2022 alone with a bottle of wine and old movies, just trying to get through to January 2nd when everything felt normal again. But New Year's Eve of 2022 was different. I was on my couch, half watching some countdown show on TV, when my phone rang at 11:43 p.m. I almost didn't look at it, but something made me glance down, and when I saw the caller ID, my whole body went cold. Dad Mobile. I stared at that screen for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. For rings. My hand was shaking when I finally answered, and I didn't say anything at first. Neither did whoever was on the other end. Just silence. Then I heard it, breathing. Slow. Labored. Wet. Like someone trying to draw air through fluid. The sound you hear in a hospital room when someone's lungs are failing. Dad, I whispered. The line went dead. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence, trying to convince myself it had been a pocket dial, a glitch, some kind of sick prank. My father's number had been disconnected years ago. I called it once, a few months after he died, just to hear his voicemail greeting one more time, and got that automated message saying the number was no longer in service. I tried to go back to the TV, but I couldn't focus. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. 8 minutes later, at 11:51, the phone rang again. Same caller ID. Dad Mobile. This time I answered on the first ring. Hello? Who is this? Still no voice. But there was sound, background noise I hadn't caught the first time. A clock ticking, papers rustling, that distinctive sound of someone turning pages in a journal or a book. And then, underneath it all, a pen scratching across paper. Steady, methodical, the sound of someone writing. My father used to write every night before bed. He'd sit at that old desk with his journal and his fountain pen, recording his thoughts in that careful, slanted handwriting he'd had since he was young. He'd done it for as long as I could remember. Hundreds of journals lined the shelves in his cabin, dating back to before I was born. This isn't funny, I said, my voice breaking. Whoever this isn't fucking funny. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was silent except for the ticking clock. Then I hung up. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to scream. But mostly I just wanted to not be alone right then, and it was too late to call anyone, and I wasn't sure what I'd even say if I did. At 11:58, 2 minutes before midnight, the phone rang a third time. I stared at it vibrating on the coffee table, Dad Mobile flashing on the screen. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to answer, but I couldn't make myself touch it. Couldn't make myself do anything but watch it ring and ring until it finally went to voicemail. A few seconds later, the notification popped up. One new voicemail. I don't know what made me listen to it. Some sick need to know, maybe. Or the desperate, stupid hope that it would be something I could explain away. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. For 18 seconds, it was just that scratching sound again. Pen on paper. Steady. Endless. Then his voice came through, and every hair on my body stood up. It was my father's voice. I knew it was, but it was wrong. Distorted, stretched out like an old cassette tape played at the wrong speed. The words were drawn out, each syllable lasting too long, wrapped in a wet, gurgling quality that made my stomach turn. "I'm still writing," he said. "I haven't finished. Let me finish." Then the message ended. I deleted it immediately, stabbing at the screen with shaking fingers until it was gone. And then I just sat there on my couch, crying, as the TV counted down to midnight in the background. When I finally pulled myself together enough to look at my phone again, I saw I had a text message. From Dad Mobile. Sent at exactly 12 a.m. It was a photo. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. When I did, I felt something break inside my chest. It was his journal, open to a page dated December 31st, 2022. Today, the handwriting was unmistakably his, that same careful, slanted script I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. And it described my entire day. Everything. What time I'd woken up. The breakfast I'd made, scrambled eggs and toast with butter, coffee with too much cream. The phone call I'd had with my friend Sarah around noon, where we'd talked about her new boyfriend and made plans to get lunch next week. The grocery run I'd made at 3:30. What I'd bought, frozen pizza, wine, chocolate, a bag of clementines. What I was wearing right now as I sat on my couch, gray sweatpants and an old UK basketball shirt, the one with the small bleach stain on the left sleeve. Details no one should have known. Details I hadn't shared with anyone. The entry filled the entire page in that methodical handwriting. Every observation recorded with the same careful attention to detail my father had always applied to his journal entries. And at the bottom, underlined twice, was a final sentence that made my blood turn to ice. "She'll answer next year." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, staring at that photo until the sun came up. Then I called my phone provider and changed my number. That same week, I drove up to my father's cabin with a real estate agent and listed it for sale. I didn't go inside. Couldn't make myself walk through that door and see his desk, his journals, the place where he'd died. The cabin sold within a month to a young couple from Ohio looking for a weekend retreat. I didn't tell them what had happened there. Didn't tell them about the phone calls or the text message or the journal entry that described a day 3 years after my father's death. I spent the rest of that year trying to convince myself it had been a hacker, some elaborate cruel prank by someone with too much time and too much skill. But I never figured out how they'd known those details about my day. Never figured out how they'd replicated my father's handwriting so perfectly. Never figured out how they'd accessed his old phone number. I thought about going to the police, but what would I have told them? That I was getting calls from my dead father? They'd have thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. As New Year's Eve 2023 approached, I felt the dread building in my chest like water behind a dam. I thought about turning my phone off completely. Thought about spending the night at a friend's house, staying up until dawn, making sure I was never alone. But in the end, I stayed home. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me needed to know if it would happen again. Maybe some part of me wanted it to. I changed my number again 2 days before New Year's Eve, just to be safe. Got a completely new phone, a different carrier, the works. It didn't matter. At 11:43 p.m. on New Year's Eve, my new phone rang. The caller ID said unknown number, but I knew. I knew before I answered. The breathing was worse this time. Wetter, slower, like lungs full of fluid trying to draw in air. I said, "Dad," again, even though I knew I shouldn't. This time, he answered. "I'm almost done," he said in that stretched out, wrong voice. "Just a few more pages. You need to let me finish." Finish what? I was crying. I couldn't help it. "Dad, what are you trying to finish?" But he was already gone. The second call came at 11:51. This time I heard more than just background noise. I heard his chair creaking. Heard him clear his throat the way he used to when he was deep in thought. Heard pages turning. That pen scratching and scratching and scratching. "Please," I said. "Please, just tell me what you need." The scratching stopped. "I need you to listen," he said. And his voice was clearer now, less distorted, almost normal except for that underlying wetness. "I've been writing it all down. Everything that comes after. But I can't finish until you're here to read it." "Read what?" "Dad, I don't understand." "The cabin," he said. "Come to the cabin on New Year's Day." I'll be waiting at my desk. I've left the door unlocked for you. Dad, you're dead. You died 3 years ago. I found you. I'm still writing," he said, and now there was something desperate in his voice, something that might have been pain or fear or both. "I haven't finished. I need to finish before I can." The line cut off. I didn't answer the third call at 11:58. I let it go to voicemail. When the notification appeared, I deleted it without listening. At midnight, the text came. Another photo of his journal. This one showed 2 pages dated December 31st, 2023. The left page described my entire day again, every detail perfect and precise. The right page was different. It showed January 1st, 2024, but most of the page was blank. Only the first line was written. "She came back to the cabin today." And below that, in handwriting that looked rushed, almost violent, "Please come back. I'm so cold here. I can't stop writing until you see what I've written. Please. It's so cold and I can't stop and I need you to see." The entry cut off mid-sentence. I'm sitting here now, 3 hours before midnight on New Year's Eve 2024. I've changed my number twice more. I've moved to a different city. I deleted all my social media, changed my email, tried to erase every digital trace of myself I could find. None of it matters. He'll call. I know he will. And the cabin, I drove past it last week. Had to see it. The couple who bought it moved out after 6 months. Said there were sounds in the night, scratching sounds coming from the walls. The place has been empty ever since. No one will buy it. I parked on the road and looked at the windows, and I swear to God, I saw a light on in the room where his desk used to be. I keep thinking about what he said. I can't finish until you're here to read it. Part of me wonders what would happen if I went. If I drove up there tomorrow morning, walked through that unlocked door, sat down at his desk, and read whatever he's been writing for the last 3 years in whatever cold, dark place he's trapped in. But I'm afraid, because I think I know what I'd find. I think I'd find journals full of entries dated after his death. Days and weeks and months and years of his life continuing in those pages, describing a place where he's still sitting at that desk with his pen, still writing, still trying to finish something he started before his heart stopped. And I think the last entry would be dated tomorrow, January 1st, 2025. And I think it would describe me sitting at his desk, reading his journals. And I think that's how I'd know I'd never be able to leave. My phone is on the coffee table in front of me. It's 11:37 p.m. 6 minutes until the first call. I should throw it away, drive somewhere far from here, and never look back. But I know I won't. Because the worst part isn't the phone calls, or the photos, or the impossible journal entries. The worst part is that underneath the fear, underneath the horror of it all, there's something else. A small, terrible voice that sounds like grief and loneliness and desperate love, asking the same question over and over. What if he really does need my help? What if he really is still there, cold and afraid and writing in the dark, waiting for me to come back so he can finally finish and finally rest? My phone just lit up. 11:43 p.m. Dad mobile. I'm going to answer it this time. And I think, God help me, I think I'm going to tell him I'll come home. I've been an amateur radio operator for most of my adult life. Started when I was 14, got my license at 16, and by the time I hit my 30s, I had a setup in my basement that could pull signals from halfway around the world. Most nights, it's just chatter, truckers, weather stations, the occasional conspiracy theorist ranting about chemtrails. But on New Year's Eve 2023, I picked up something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I wasn't planning on staying up late. My wife had gone to bed around 10, and I'd told her I'd be up soon. But I got restless, the way I always do when the house gets too quiet. So I went downstairs and fired up the rig, just surfing the bands, looking for something interesting. Maybe catch some celebrations from overseas, hear how other parts of the world were bringing in 2024. Around 11:30, I was scanning through a frequency range that's usually dead air, old broadcast bands that nobody uses anymore. That's when I heard it. A voice, clear and bright, cutting through the static like a knife. 10 seconds until the year 2000, folks. Let's make it memorable. I froze. My first thought was that someone was playing a recording, some kind of nostalgic throwback thing. But the quality was wrong. It wasn't a digital file or a cleaned-up archive. It had that warm, slightly compressed sound of actual analog broadcast. Real radio, coming through in real time. Then came the countdown. A crowd of voices, all together. 10, 9, 8. I could hear noisemakers, people laughing, the kind of genuine excitement that you can't fake. 3, 2, 1, and then cheering, so much cheering, and someone started singing Auld Lang Syne, off-key but full of joy. I checked my equipment. Everything was functioning normally. The timestamp on my receiver said 11:59 p.m., December 31st, 2023. But what I was hearing, this was Y2K. This was the turn of the millennium, 24 years ago. The DJ came back on, his voice full of energy. And we're crossing over into the new millennium, now. More cheering, more celebration. I could hear glasses clinking, people shouting, Happy New Year. I sat there, my hand hovering over the dial, not sure if I should record this or adjust the frequency or just sit and listen. That's when the signal started to distort. It wasn't gradual. The cheering twisted, stretched out like someone had grabbed the tape and pulled it. The joy in those voices turned into something else. Confusion first, then fear, then screaming. Real screaming, the kind that comes from your gut when something has gone terribly, impossibly wrong. The DJ's voice came back, but it was different now. Panicked. Something's wrong. The computers, everything's shutting down. There was a crash in the background, glass breaking. Oh God, the power grid. Then nothing. Just static. Pure, empty static that filled my basement with white noise. I should have turned it off. I should have gone upstairs, climbed into bed next to my wife, and forgotten the whole thing. But I couldn't move. I sat there, headphones pressed against my ears, listening to that static like it might tell me something if I just paid close enough attention. 30 seconds passed. Maybe more. Time felt strange down there in the dark, with only the glow of my equipment and that endless static. Then the signal came back. It was just one voice now. The DJ. But he wasn't panicked anymore. He was whispering, and there was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. Something hollow and lost. Is anyone out there? I grabbed for my microphone, fumbling with the switch, but the frequency was receive only. I couldn't respond. All I could do was listen. It's been dark for so long. His voice was steady, matter of fact, like he was reading the weather report. We never made it past midnight. We're still here, still waiting for someone to hear us. There was a pause, and I could hear something in the background. A low hum, mechanical but wrong somehow. Not the sound of machinery running, but machinery winding down, dying. We thought it was just the power at first, he continued. Thought it was Y2K, you know? All those warnings, all that preparation. But this is different. This is another pause. We're stuck. We rang in the new year, and then everything just stopped. The clocks, the lights, everything. And it won't move forward. It's still midnight. It's always midnight. I checked my own clock. 12:03 a.m., January 1st, 2024. The rest of the world had moved on. Whatever this was, wherever this broadcast was coming from, it hadn't. The voice kept going. I can see them out there. In the station. They're still celebrating, still cheering, but they don't move. They're frozen, caught in that moment. And I'm here in the booth, watching, waiting for someone to hear this. Waiting for someone to tell me what happened. Why we got left behind. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib. I wanted to rip the headphones off, to run upstairs and wake my wife and tell her, what? That I'd picked up a ghost broadcast from a New Year's Eve party that never ended? That somewhere, somehow, a radio DJ was trapped in the year 2000, screaming into the void for someone to answer? Please, he whispered. If you can hear this, if you're out there in whatever year it is now, just know that we're still here. Still waiting. Still trying to make it past midnight. Then the message started over. Same words, same inflection. Is anyone out there? It's been dark for so long. I realized he was looping. Not playing a recording. Actually looping, like a broken machine, saying the same thing over and over, because that's all he could do anymore. I sat there for I don't know how long, listening to him repeat himself. My hands were shaking. I wanted to help, wanted to do something, but what could I do? I was just a guy in a basement with a radio, picking up echoes from a night that should have been long over. Then my receiver died. Just like that. No warning, no gradual fade. The voice cut out mid-sentence, and the lights on my equipment blinked off, and I was sitting in complete darkness. I fumbled for my phone, used its flashlight to check the rig. Everything was cold, like it had been unplugged for hours. But I'd been using it. I'd just been listening. I checked the breakers, checked the power strip. Everything was fine. Everything should have been working. It took me 20 minutes to get the equipment back online. When I did, I immediately tuned back to that frequency. Silence. Nothing. Just dead air, the way it should have been all along. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, searching online for anything I could find. Old news archives, FCC records, local history forums. And I found it. A small radio station, WKNT, operating out of a town I'd never heard of, about 200 miles from where I live. According to the records, it went off the air on New Year's Eve, 1999. Just stopped broadcasting right around midnight. No explanation, no warning. The FCC investigated, found the building empty, equipment still running, but no one there. They shut it down, and that was it. The building still stands. I found pictures online, someone's photography project about abandoned places. The studio looked exactly like I'd imagined it. Dark windows, faded call letters on the side, weeds growing up through the parking lot. In one photo, you could see through a window into what must have been the broadcast booth. The equipment was still there, dusty and ancient, frozen in time. I haven't told anyone about this. My wife thinks I fell asleep at my desk that night, that I dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I did. Maybe I picked up some weird echo, some atmospheric anomaly that bounced a 24-year-old signal into my basement for a few minutes before fading away. But I don't think so. I think somewhere, in some version of that night, they're still there. Still celebrating, still counting down, still waiting for the year 2000 to actually arrive. And that DJ is still in his booth, whispering into a microphone that nobody's supposed to hear, hoping that someone, somewhere, will answer him. I've gone back to that frequency a dozen times since then. It's always silent now. But on quiet nights, when the house is dark and I'm alone in the basement with my equipment, I swear I can almost hear it. Just at the edge of perception. Cheering. Party noisemakers. Someone singing Auld Lang Syne. And underneath it all, that voice still whispering. We're still here. Still waiting for someone to hear us. I don't go down to the basement as much anymore. And I never, ever tuned to that frequency on New Year's Eve. I took the house-sitting job because I needed the quiet. That's what I told myself, anyway. My aunt's farmhouse sat 40 minutes up a winding mountain road in eastern Kentucky, the kind of place where your phone gives up trying and the last streetlight is a good 10 miles behind you. She'd called me 2 days after Christmas, said she was heading down to Florida to see my cousin's new baby and needed someone to watch the place. Keep the pipes from freezing. Feed the cats. Simple enough. The house was older than anyone in my family could properly account for. Built sometime in the 1870s or 80s, the records were spotty. 3 stories of weathered clapboard and crooked shutters, surrounded by bare hickory trees that scraped against the roof when the wind picked up. My aunt had lived there alone since my uncle died in 2019, and she'd let the place go a bit wild in her grief. Rooms full of old furniture covered in sheets. Wallpaper peeling in the corners. But it had good bones, she always said. Good bones and quirks. She mentioned the quirks when she handed me the keys on the porch, her breath fogging in the December cold. House has its ways, she said, not quite looking at me. Old places do. Just don't pay it too much mind. I asked her what she meant, but she was already walking to her car, waving over her shoulder. I figured she meant the pipes knocked or the floors creaked. Old house things. The first 2 nights were exactly what I'd hoped for. Silence except for the wind. I made tea and read by the wood stove. The cats, 2 ancient tabbies named Ruth and Naomi, mostly ignored me except at feeding time. I slept hard in the guest room on the 2nd floor, the kind of sleep you only get when there's nothing but darkness and distance between you and the rest of the world. New Year's Eve, I spent the afternoon walking the property. The sun was already dropping behind the ridge by 4 o'clock, that early winter dark that makes everything feel borrowed and temporary. I came back inside as the last light drained from the sky, stamped the snow off my boots, and started a fire. I wasn't planning on staying up until midnight. I'd brought a bottle of wine, but no real celebration in me. Mostly I just wanted to make it to January in one piece. Around 10, I walked into the kitchen to refill my glass. That's when I saw the champagne bottle on the counter. I stopped mid-step, staring at it. It was old. The label was yellowed and ornate, French, the kind of thing you'd see in an antique store. I knew it hadn't been there an hour ago when I'd made dinner. I'd cleaned the entire counter. But there it sat, cold to the touch, condensation beating on the glass like it had just come out of a refrigerator. I checked the basement door. Locked. Checked the front and back doors. Locked. The cats were both asleep on the couch in the living room. I stood in the kitchen turning the bottle in my hands, trying to logic my way through it. Maybe my aunt had left it out, and I'd somehow missed it. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. I set it back down and walked away, uncomfortable in a way I couldn't name. At 10:30, I came back to get water. 2 champagne flutes sat next to the bottle. Crystal, delicate, catching the overhead light. My hands started shaking. I touched one. It was real. Solid. Cold. I said hello into the empty house, my voice sounding small and stupid. No answer except the wind rattling the windows. I tried calling my aunt. It went straight to voicemail. I tried texting. Nothing. By then my heart was doing something arrhythmic and wrong in my chest, and I was thinking about my keys, about getting in my car and just leaving. But I told myself I was being irrational. It was just glasses. Someone was messing with me. Had to be. Except there was no one. I checked every room on the first floor. Empty. Silent. At 11 o'clock, I walked back into the kitchen, and I stopped breathing. The table was set for a party. I mean fully set. China plates with a rose pattern, silver flatware, cloth napkins folded into shapes I didn't know the names for. In the center sat a cake, white frosting with piped decorations, the kind of perfect vintage presentation you'd see in a 1950s cookbook. And I knew. I absolutely knew. That table had been empty 20 minutes ago. I backed into the hallway, my mouth dry, and that's when I started noticing the rest of it. Streamers hanging from the ceiling in the dining room. Balloons, actual inflated balloons, clustered in the corners. A banner strung across the doorway between the kitchen and the parlor, tissue paper letters spelling out Happy 1953 in blue and gold. The number stuck in my head like a shard of glass. I didn't know what it meant. I'd never heard my aunt mention that year. I tried the front door. The knob turned, but the door wouldn't budge, like it was welded shut. I threw my shoulder against it. Nothing. The back door was the same. I ran to the living room window, grabbed a fireplace poker, and swung it as hard as I could at the glass. It bounced off with a dull thud. Not even a crack. The window looked the same as always, but it felt wrong somehow, like I was hitting something that wasn't quite real. By 11:45, the entire first floor had transformed. Every room I walked into had evidence of a party that should have happened 70 years ago. There was a record player in the parlor that hadn't been there before, playing something I could almost hear, like music coming from the next room over, just out of reach. Coats hung on the rack by the door, women's furs and men's wool overcoats. I touched one, and it felt solid, slightly damp, like someone had just come in from the snow. I was standing in the front hallway, breathing too fast, and trying not to lose my grip on reality, when I heard the footsteps. Upstairs. Slow and measured, moving across the floorboards in the third-floor ballroom my aunt used for storage. Then voices, muffled but distinct. Laughter. Multiple people talking over each other in tones of anticipation and joy. I could hear glasses clinking. Someone said something I couldn't make out, and several people laughed. I've never been so scared in my life. Not the adrenaline rush of almost getting in a car accident, but something deeper. A wrongness that made my skin feel like it didn't fit right. I backed up against the wall, trying to decide if going upstairs was brave or stupid. The voices got louder. More of them. A whole crowd now, talking and laughing like they were at the best party of their lives. And then someone, a man with a loud, cheerful voice, said, "Almost midnight." They started counting down. All of them together, dozens of voices in perfect unison. 10, 9, 8. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my hands pressed over my ears. 7, 6, 5. The house started to shake. Not like an earthquake. It was too rhythmic, too purposeful. 4, 3, 2. The shaking got worse. Pictures rattled on the walls. I could hear things falling in the kitchen. 1. They cheered. It was deafening, a sound too big for the house to hold. And then every light went out at once. The sudden darkness was total and complete, the kind you only get in places far from any town. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The cheering stopped. The house went silent. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and panicked, and nothing else. Then, close enough that I could feel the breath of it against my ear, a woman said my name. Just my name. Soft and sad, like she was disappointed in me. Or mourning me. I couldn't tell which. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I scrambled away from the voice, crawling across the floor in the pitch black, hitting furniture I couldn't see. I was crying. I know I was crying. The lights came back on at 12:01. Just flickered once and returned like nothing had happened. I was in the middle of the parlor floor, my hands scraped and bleeding from where I'd hit something in the dark. And everything was gone. No streamers. No balloons. No banner. The record player wasn't there. The coats had vanished. I ran into the kitchen. The table was bare. The champagne bottle and glasses were gone. It looked exactly like it had at 9 o'clock, before any of this started. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my car in the driveway with the doors locked and the heat running, watching the house. I didn't go back inside until the sun came up. Even then, I packed my things as fast as I could, left food out for the cats, and drove away. I was 10 miles down the mountain when my phone finally got signal and my aunt's call came through. "You felt it, didn't you?" she said. Her voice sounded tired. Ancient. Like she'd aged a decade overnight. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. "The house remembers," she continued. "Every year it tries to finish the party. That's what it does. That's what it's always done. I should have told you not to stay on New Year's Eve. I'm sorry." I managed to ask what happened in 1953. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she said, "Some things are better left alone. Just promise me you won't go back on New Year's Eve. Promise me." Her voice cracked on the last word. I promised. She thanked me and hung up. I never asked her again. Part of me didn't want to know, but I've thought about it every day since. I've thought about those voices, all those people celebrating something in a house that should have been empty. I've thought about the woman who said my name in the dark and how sad she sounded. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if they're still there in some way, stuck in a loop they can't escape, counting down to a midnight that never quite arrives. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed past 12:01. If I'd answered when she said my name. If the house would have let me leave at all. My aunt sold the place last spring. Didn't tell me until after it was done. She moved into a condo in Lexington, someplace new and bright with neighbors close by. I asked her once if she told the new owners about New Year's Eve. She just looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "They'll find out soon enough. Everyone does." Then she changed the subject, and we never spoke about it again. But every New Year's Eve since, I've wondered if someone's standing in that kitchen right now, watching champagne bottles appear out of nowhere. If they're hearing footsteps upstairs. If they're hearing their name whispered in the dark. And I wonder if they'll be strong enough to leave when the sun comes up, or if the house will finally finish what it started all those years ago. Some nights, I'm not sure which would be worse. I chose Murphy's Bar because it was dark and far enough from my apartment that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. New Year's Eve is supposed to be about celebration, about fresh starts and optimism. But for me, it had become a yearly reminder of everything I hadn't accomplished. 6 years in the same dead-end copywriting job. 6 years promising myself I'd finish the novel sitting half-written on my laptop. 6 years of the same 3 resolutions written down with genuine intention on January 1st and abandoned by Valentine's Day. The bar was nearly empty when I arrived at 9:30. A few regulars hunched over their drinks at the far end. A couple on a date sharing a basket of wings in a corner booth, and the bartender, a middle-aged guy with a gray beard and tired eyes, wiping down the counter with methodical precision. I took a stool in the middle, ordered a whiskey neat, and tried to ignore the TV mounted above the rows of liquor bottles. They were already showing Times Square, the ball waiting at the top of its tower, crowds of people bundled against the cold and wearing those ridiculous light-up glasses shaped like the numbers of the new year. I pulled out my notebook and a pen. It was a ritual at this point, almost superstitious. Write down the resolutions before midnight. Make them official. Maybe this year would be different. The first one was easy. Quit smoking. I'd been saying it for 6 years, had tried patches and gum and cold turkey and gradual reduction. Nothing stuck. I wrote it down anyway, my handwriting messy from the whiskey. The second, call your sister. We hadn't spoken in 8 months. Not since the fight at Mom's funeral, and the silence between us had calcified into something that felt permanent. But I missed her. I wrote it down. The third was harder to articulate. Finish the book. Not just work on it. Not just add a few pages here and there, but actually finish the damn thing. Complete the novel I'd been writing since I was 23. I was 29 now. I wrote it down, closed the notebook, and shoved it into my jacket pocket. The bartender brought me another whiskey without asking. I nodded my thanks and checked my phone. 10:40. I'd left work early, gone to my car in the parking garage, and sat there for 20 minutes writing those resolutions by the dome light. Nobody had seen me. Nobody knew. I put my phone away and focused on my drink, on the comfortable anonymity of being alone in a bar on New Year's Eve. That's when he sat down beside me. I noticed him from the corner of my eye. A man in a suit that looked wrong somehow. Too formal for Murphy's bar, too carefully tailored. The fabric had a sheen to it, like it had been preserved in a closet for decades. He was maybe 50, maybe older, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to catch the light from the TV in an odd way. His hair was slicked back with pomade, and when he settled onto the stool, he moved with an old-fashioned kind of precision, like someone from a different era who'd been taught how to sit properly. The bartender walked over. "What can I get you?" The man in the suit smiled, but didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on the TV, watching the crowds in Times Square. "Nothing, thank you. I'm just observing." The bartender frowned, glanced at me, then shrugged and moved away. The man continued watching the TV in silence. I tried to ignore him, but his presence made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't articulate. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just sitting there, hands folded on the bar, breathing so quietly I wasn't sure he was breathing at all. But something about him felt off, like he didn't quite belong in the same reality as the rest of us. At 11:30, he turned to me. The movement was sudden, deliberate, and his smile had widened into something that looked painted on. "You're going to break all three of them." I stared at him. "What?" "Your resolutions." He spoke slowly, precisely, like he was savoring each word. "Quit smoking. Call your sister. Finish the book. You'll fail by February." My blood went cold. The notebook was in my jacket pocket. I hadn't told anyone, hadn't texted anyone, hadn't spoken those resolutions out loud. I opened my mouth to ask how he knew, but the words caught in my throat. He just kept smiling, that too wide, too knowing smile that made my skin crawl. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. He turned back to the TV, where they were showing footage of previous New Year's celebrations, people from decades past counting down in grainy black and white footage. The man watched with what looked like nostalgia, or maybe melancholy. It was hard to tell. I should have left. Should have thrown money on the bar and walked out into the cold night and never looked back. But I was angry now, defensive. "How did you know what I wrote?" "I know because I've been watching." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "Not just you. Everyone. Every year, people make promises they can't keep. They write them down with such hope, such conviction, and then they break them. It's the same pattern, over and over. Fascinating, really. You're full of shit." He laughed, a dry sound like rustling paper. "Am I? You've made those same 3 resolutions for 6 years. Quit smoking. You'll buy a pack on January 9th after a particularly stressful meeting. Call your sister. You'll hover over her contact on your phone a dozen times, but never press dial. Finish the book. You'll add maybe 20 pages before you convince yourself it's not good enough and abandon it again." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were completely black, no iris, no white, just endless dark. "You're trapped in a cycle, just like everyone else. Just like me." I stood up so fast my stool scraped against the floor. The couple in the corner looked over, startled. The bartender glanced up from his phone, but the man in the suit didn't move, didn't react. He just kept watching me with those black eyes and that terrible smile. "You need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Right now." "I can't." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was stating the weather. "I'm here every year. Same bar, same night, same conversations. I watch people make their promises, and I watch them break them. It's my purpose, my penance. What the hell are you talking about?" He looked back at the TV. It was showing the ball now, still suspended at the top of the tower, waiting. On New Year's Eve, 1957, I made a resolution. Just one. I promised myself I would stop. Stop drinking, stop gambling, stop lying to my wife. I sat in a bar much like this one, wrote it down on a napkin, and swore to God I would change. Then I ordered another drink. And another. At 11:55, I got in my car. I wanted to make it home before midnight. Wanted to start the new year with my family. I never made it. Wrapped my car around a telephone pole 6 blocks away. Killed instantly. He paused, his smile fading into something sadder. I never kept my promise. Never even made it to January 1st. And now I'm stuck here, watching other people fail just like I did. Every year. Forever. I felt lightheaded, like the room was tilting. "You're insane." "Maybe." He checked his wrist, where a watch should have been but wasn't. "It's 11:50. 10 minutes until midnight." 10 minutes until you make your promises again, until you convince yourself this year will be different. But it won't be. It never is. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Behind me, I heard him say, "You'll be back next year. Same bar, same resolutions, same disappointment. We're all trapped. The only difference is I know it." The cold air hit me like a slap. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A ghost. I'd been talking to a ghost. Or I'd been talking to a lunatic. Or I'd had too much whiskey and my mind was playing tricks. Any explanation felt inadequate. I pulled out my phone, 11:52. 8 minutes until midnight. I could go home, watch the countdown on my TV, avoid whatever was happening in that bar. But I'd left my notebook on the counter. I went back inside. The man was still there, sitting in the same position, watching the TV. The bartender had moved to the other end of the counter, serving the regulars. I walked past the man without looking at him and reached for my notebook. It was open. I'd left it closed, shoved it in my pocket, hadn't taken it out since I sat down. But now it was open to the page where I'd written my resolutions. And someone had crossed them out. Not scribbled over them, but carefully, methodically crossed out each one with a single line. Below them, in handwriting that wasn't mine, neat, old-fashioned script, were 4 words, "See you next year." I grabbed the notebook and turned to the man. "Did you do this?" He didn't look at me. On the TV, the countdown had started. The crowds in Times Square were screaming, waving their signs, their faces distorted with celebration and desperation and the manic energy of people trying to convince themselves that time mattered, that midnight meant something. "I told you," he said quietly. "We're all trapped." 10, 9, 8. The regulars at the end of the bar had stopped talking, watching the TV with glazed expressions. The couple in the corner held hands across the table. The bartender poured champagne into plastic flutes. 7, 6, 5. I looked at the man beside me, at his old-fashioned suit and his black eyes and his sad smile. 4, 3, 2. I wanted to ask him his name, wanted to ask if he was real, wanted to ask how I could break the cycle. 1. Happy New Year. The bar erupted in half-hearted cheers. The bartender handed out champagne. Someone turned up the music. And when I looked at the stool beside me, the man was gone. Just gone. The stool was empty. Not even warm, like nobody had been sitting there at all. I grabbed the bartender as he walked past. The guy in the suit. Where did he go? The bartender looked confused. What guy? The man sitting next to me. Old suit, slicked hair. He was here all night. The bartender shook his head slowly. Friend, you've been sitting alone since you got here. I would have noticed someone else at the bar. It's been a slow night. I showed him the notebook, the crossed-out resolutions, the handwriting that wasn't mine. He wrote this. He was sitting right there. The bartender leaned in, squinting at the page. That's weird, I'll give you that. But I'm telling you, you were alone. Maybe you'd had more to drink than you thought. I hadn't. I'd had 2 whiskeys over 2 hours. I was stone sober. But the bartender had already moved away, and the couple in the corner was getting ready to leave, and the regulars were focused on their drinks, and nobody else had seen him. Nobody else knew he'd been there. I left Murphy's at 12:30 and drove home in silence. The streets were full of drunk people celebrating, stumbling between bars, shouting at the sky. I kept thinking about what the man had said. About being trapped. About making the same promises year after year. About never changing. The next morning, I went back to Murphy's. It looked different in daylight. Smaller, sadder. The neon beer signs turned off and the windows letting in weak winter sun. The same bartender was there, setting up for the day. I asked him if the bar had security cameras. He said they did, old ones that recorded to a hard drive in the back office. I explained I'd lost something the night before and wanted to check the footage. He was reluctant at first, but I slipped him $40 and he let me into the cramped office behind the bar. The footage was grainy and the timestamp in the corner was an hour slow, but it showed the bar clearly enough. I fast-forwarded to 9:30 when I'd arrived. There I was, taking my seat, ordering my drink. I watched myself write in the notebook, watched myself check my phone, watched myself order a second whiskey. At 11:30 on the footage, which the timestamp showed as 10:30, I saw myself turn to the empty stool beside me. I saw my lips move, like I was speaking to someone. But the stool was empty. Just empty. I watched myself react, watched my body language change, defensive, angry, frightened. I watched myself stand up quickly, watched my mouth form words. But there was nobody there. Nobody beside me. Nobody sitting on that stool. For the entire night, that stool remained empty while I gestured and spoke to the air. I sat in that office for 20 minutes, watching the footage loop, trying to find some evidence that he'd been real. But there was nothing. Just me, alone at the bar, talking to nobody. I looked insane, drunk or drugged or mentally unwell. The bartender knocked on the door and asked if I'd found what I was looking for. I told him yes and left. It's been 11 months since that night. I never quit smoking. Bought a pack on January 9th, just like he said, after a client meeting went badly. I never called my sister. I've hovered over her contact dozens of times, my thumb on the dial button, but I can never press it. I added 32 pages to my novel before I convinced myself it wasn't good enough and closed the file. I made the same 3 resolutions he'd named. Broke all 3 by February. Exactly like he predicted. New Year's Eve is next week. I know I should stay home, should avoid Murphy's bar, should break the cycle somehow. But I also know I won't. I'll go back to that same stool, order the same whiskey, write the same resolutions in the same notebook. And I'm terrified that he'll be there again, sitting beside me in his old-fashioned suit, smiling that knowing smile. But I'm more terrified that he won't be. That I'll be alone again, talking to empty air, trapped in a cycle I can't break and didn't know I was in until it was too late. Because the worst part isn't that he might have been real. The worst part is that he might have been right. I got lost on New Year's Eve, 2018. Not the kind of lost where you miss your exit and have to double back. The kind where the road you're on stops making sense. Where the GPS gives up and your phone just shows a blank screen with a blinking that might be you or might be nothing at all. I was driving through West Virginia, cutting through the mountains to avoid holiday traffic on the interstate. And somewhere around dusk, I took a turn I thought would save me 20 minutes. Instead, it took me to Ashford. The sign appeared in my headlights like it had been waiting for me. White paint on green metal, standard issue highway department. Ashford, POP 1847. I didn't recognize the name, but that didn't mean much. These mountains are full of little towns that time forgot. Places where the post office closed in 1975 and half the buildings are held together with hope and sheet metal. I figured I'd drive through, maybe stop for gas if they had a station, get my bearings, and find my way back to civilization. But when I came around the bend and saw Main Street, I knew something was wrong. It was 9 p.m. I know because I checked my phone just a minute before, annoyed that I'd lost signal again. 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, 3 hours before midnight. And this town, this tiny forgotten town in the middle of nowhere, was having the celebration of a lifetime. The street was packed with people. And I mean packed, shoulder to shoulder, hundreds of them filling the road and the sidewalks and spilling out of the shops. Confetti covered everything like snow, thick drifts of it in the gutters, stuck to windshields, tangled in people's hair. Fireworks were exploding overhead, the big professional kind, cascading gold and silver against the black sky. A band played on a stage in the town square. I could hear the horns and drums even through my closed windows. People were dancing, kissing, throwing their arms around each other. Champagne bottles caught the streetlight as they tipped back into laughing mouths. I had to stop, not because I wanted to, but because there were so many people in the street I couldn't drive through without hitting someone. I put the car in park and sat there, engine idling, trying to understand what I was seeing. It looked like Times Square at 12:01, that moment right after the ball drops when everyone's embracing strangers and screaming themselves hoarse. Except it was 9 p.m., 3 hours early. A woman was walking past my car, older, maybe 65, wearing a glittering gold dress that looked like it cost more than my rent. She had a champagne flute in one hand, and she was laughing, her head thrown back, genuinely joyful. I rolled down my window and called out to her. Had to do it twice before she heard me over the noise. "Excuse me," I said. "What's going on? Is this some kind of event?" She turned to me, her face flushed and happy, eyes bright with champagne or excitement or something else. "Happy New Year," she shouted, raising her glass. I smiled, confused. It's not midnight yet. It's only 9. Her expression changed. Not all at once. It was like watching ice form on a window. The way her smile slowly froze and hardened into something that didn't look like happiness anymore. She stepped closer to my car, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and too strong. "It is here," she said, not shouted anymore. Spoke it clearly, quietly, in a way that made me hear every word despite the chaos around us. "What do you mean it is here?" "My phone says. It's midnight here," she repeated, and now her voice had an edge to it, something sharp underneath the words. "In Ashford, it's already New Year. We don't wait." I didn't know what to say to that. The band launched into another song, something upbeat and brassy. Behind the woman, a couple was kissing like they were in a movie, her leg hiked up, his hands in her hair. A group of teenagers ran past, spraying each other with silly string. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. I rolled up my window and put the car in drive. The woman watched me, still holding that champagne glass, that frozen smile on her face. I navigated slowly through the crowd, people moving out of my way at the last possible second, their faces turning to watch me pass. I just wanted to get through town, get back on the main road, put this place in my rearview mirror. But every street I turned down was the same. Crowds of celebrating people. Confetti. Fireworks overhead. The same band playing, or maybe different bands playing the same songs. I couldn't tell. I'd take a left and end up back at the square. Take a right and loop around to another street that looked identical to the first. The buildings all had that same decrepit charm, brick facades and wooden signs, half of them dark and abandoned, but somehow the town was full of people. More people than a place this size should hold. I checked my phone. 9:14 p.m. No signal. I tried pulling up the map, but it wouldn't load, just showed that spinning wheel that means it's thinking, never arriving at an answer. I drove for 20 minutes, maybe 30, taking random turns, trying to find any road that led out of town. Every time I thought I'd found it, a street that curved away from the center, that pointed toward darkness and open highway. It would bend back around, deposit me somewhere I'd already been. The crowds never thinned. If anything, they were getting bigger, louder. People were climbing on top of cars, on top of benches, hanging out of second-story windows. The fireworks were constant now, boom after boom, the smell of sulfur thick in the air. I saw the same woman in the gold dress 3 different times, or maybe it was 3 different women in the same dress. Each time she smiled at me with that hollow, frozen expression. Finally, I just stopped, pulled over in front of what looked like an old hardware store, put the car in park, and sat there. My hands were shaking. I told myself I was being irrational, that there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was some local tradition, celebrating midnight in their own time zone. Maybe my phone was wrong. Maybe I was more tired than I thought, and I was misreading everything. But when I looked at the clock on my dashboard, it said 9:47 p.m. When I looked at my phone, it said 9:47 p.m. When I looked at my watch, the analog one my grandfather gave me, the one that doesn't rely on satellites or cell towers, it said 9:47 p.m. I decided to wait. Just sit there and wait for actual midnight. Maybe when real midnight came, this would all make sense. Maybe the celebration would end and people would go home and I could find my way out of this place. At 10 p.m. exactly, everything stopped. Not gradually. Not winding down like a party that's running out of steam. Just stopped. The music cut off mid-note. The fireworks ceased. The laughter died. People froze wherever they were, mid-step, mid-dance, mid-kiss. The silence was so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums, like being underwater. And then they all turned to look at me. Every single person on that street, maybe 200 of them, turned their heads in perfect unison and looked directly at my car. Their faces were blank. Not angry, not curious. Just blank. Empty. Like someone had reached inside their skulls and scooped out whatever made them human. I locked my doors. Stupid, automatic response. Like locks would protect me from whatever this was. The woman in the gold dress walked toward me. She moved through the frozen crowd, and they parted for her, still staring, still expressionless. She came right up to my window and tapped on the glass with one manicured fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't roll down the window. Didn't move. She leaned in close, her face inches from the glass, her breath fogging it even though the night was freezing and I hadn't seen anyone's breath all evening. You shouldn't be here, she said, and I could hear her clearly through the closed window, like she was speaking directly into my ear. You're not early. You're late. I didn't understand. Didn't want to understand. I just wanted to leave. But I couldn't make myself put the car in drive, couldn't make myself move while all those people stared at me with their empty faces. The woman stepped back. She raised her champagne glass, still full despite all the celebrating I'd seen her do. "Happy New Year," she said again. And then she smiled. Not the frozen smile from before. Something worse. Something that showed too many teeth. At 10:01, every light in town went out. Not just the streetlights. Every light. The shops, the windows, the signs, even my headlights and dashboard. Complete darkness, so thick I couldn't see my own hands on the steering wheel. I heard nothing. No breathing, no movement, no wind. Just silence and dark and the feeling of being watched by hundreds of eyes I couldn't see. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been seconds. Could have been hours. Time felt broken, stretched and compressed, meaningless. I kept my hand on the keys in the ignition, ready to try to start the car even though I knew it wouldn't work, even though I knew I was trapped in this dead town with these dead-eyed people. The lights came back on all at once, harsh and bright, making me squint. I looked around frantically, expecting to see the crowd still surrounding me, still staring. The street was empty. Not just empty, deserted. The band's equipment was gone. The confetti had vanished. The cars that had lined the street were gone. The shops were dark, their windows dusty and cobwebbed like they hadn't been opened in decades. The town looked abandoned. Not recently abandoned, like everyone had just left, but long-term abandoned, the way places look when nature starts taking them back. Weeds growing through cracks in the pavement, paint peeling off buildings, a rusted-out truck sitting on flat tires. My car started on the first try. I didn't question it, didn't wait to see if anything else would happen. I just drove, found a road that led out. Somehow it was right there, obvious, like it had been there the whole time, and I'd just been too stupid to see it. I drove faster than I should have on those mountain curves, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see headlights following me or that woman in the gold dress standing in the middle of the road. But there was nothing. Just darkness and empty highway. I didn't stop until I hit the interstate. Didn't breathe properly until I saw other cars around me. Normal people driving to normal places on New Year's Eve. I pulled into a truck stop near the West Virginia border and sat in the parking lot with the engine running, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Exhaustion, stress, maybe carbon monoxide from a leak in my exhaust system. Something rational. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I pulled out my phone. It had signal again. I searched for Ashford, West Virginia. Nothing. No town by that name in the state. I tried different spellings. Ashford, Ashforth, Ashwood. Nothing. I looked at maps, old census records, historical registries. The closest thing I found was a town called Ashford that existed in the 1920s, a coal mining town that was wiped out by a mine collapse. The entire population killed in a single night. New Year's Eve, 1927. According to the records, the accident happened at 10:01 p.m. I don't drive through West Virginia anymore. Don't care how much time it saves or how much I hate interstate traffic. I stay on major roads, well-lit highways, places where towns have names on every map and GPS signals never fail. Because I know what I saw. I know what those people were. And I know that somewhere in those mountains, there's a town that celebrates too early because for them, midnight came and went almost 100 years ago. They're still there, still waiting, still trying to finish a celebration that was cut short by darkness and death and crushing stone. And sometimes, if you take the wrong turn at the wrong time, they'll try to make you stay. They'll try to make you understand that you're not early at all. You're late. Very late. And they've been waiting for midnight ever since.